Today we'll be taking a look at a 1985 Soviet-era World War II movie directed by Elem Klimov. Elem, being a young boy from Stalingrad, was forced to evacuate the city with his mother and younger brother, and was forever burdened with the memory of watching his entire city burn. Because of this, and the many great atrocities committed through the Soviet region, Klimov had always known deep down inside that he needed to make a film about the war. A film that was particularly difficult for him to produce due to having to fight the at-the-time Soviet censors to be able to show the movie in its entire gripping form. Something which he deemed to be incredibly important. Something which would end up taking a toll on Klimov over the years, resulting in Come and See being the final movie that he would ever direct. The horrors of the Second World War were not lost to anyone on the receiving end of conflict, so passed down horror stories and first-hand accounts are more than enough to let anyone know just how truly horrifying it was. So even with there being no shortage of potential material to make a war movie about, it wasn't until Klimov discovered the 1971 novel Shatin and the 1977 collection of survivor testimonies, I Am From the Fiery Village, which caused Klimov to know exactly what he was going to make his movie about. The German invasion of Belarus, which at the time was part of the Soviet Union, known as Belorussia. Shatin was written by a man named Ales Adamовich, who had first-hand experience as serving as a child soldier during this time, as he was a teenage member of the partisans, the resistance against the German invasion of the Soviet Union, and Belorussia that currently resided there. Adamовich was also one of the writers who helped put together the memoirs I Am From the Fiery Village, meaning that this man was more than qualified to make a movie about a young boy fighting the German invasion as a partisan, due to him being in that exact same position once in his life, with him proceeding to go into great details with the survivors of the atrocities while putting together their memoirs. So Klimov and Adamовich would work together to create the screenplay for perhaps one of the most important movies in history, because let's not forget, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. The movie follows a young Belarusian boy named Flora, played by a first-time actor, Alexei Kravchenko, as he wants to join the resistance. In an interview, Klimov stated that he didn't want to use a professional actor for the young boy. He wanted someone genuine and real, who wouldn't be able to rely on learnt acting techniques to separate himself from the horrors that he was about to see. In other words, he traumatized a child for entertainment value. During the time the movie was set, Belarusians were exposed to the unfortunate creatures known as Germans. Floyer and his young friend proceed to go to the aftermath of a recent skirmish to dig for weapons. Floyer ends up finding a rifle and a handful of ammunition, and as far as he's concerned, he's got everything he needs, and he's ready for war. After returning home to tell his mother his plans to leave, she's distraught at the thought of him leaving her and his younger sisters behind as he goes off to war. Completely overwhelmed with it all and just wanting it to stop, she even retrieves an axe before handing it to Floyer and telling him to just kill them all now so they won't have to bear it. Something which Floyer isn't exactly keen on doing, as he jokes around with his younger sisters and makes them laugh. Older members of the partisans then arrive at his home to take Floyer away, and he's happy and smiling while holding his gun and briefcase, while dressed in a nice coat and hat. This naive young boy has no idea what's truly awaiting him out there, exacerbated by the men telling his mother that it's just going to be like a summer camp. He's then thrown from his home and immediately gets his first taste of what's to come as he cuts his eye and nose against his own front door, a visual representation of the fact that now he's left his home, the bloodshed will never stop. It's going to be nothing but pain for young Flora. After arriving at the hidden partisan camp in the woods, he discovers that many of the men are just as naive about the war as he is, treating this camp as nothing more than a big party, while shouting, having fun and playing music. But after being given a good first impression in his mind, as he's put right in the front of a group picture showing everyone's eager spirits to fight, it's all torn away from him, as shortly afterwards he's present for a speech about having honour and fighting to the death, and his wide grin is ripped away from his face after being told that all of the men will be marching onwards towards battle, except him, as he's going to be staying behind to help set up the reserve camp. And emphasising the fact that he is nothing more than just a young boy at this point, his level of maturity is shown as he walks off alone in the woods to cry about being left behind. And while crying out there after discovering that he's not going to be used as cannon fodder for the Nazis, he begins to hear the cries of a girl named Glasha, who works at the camp assisting with the nurses. She seems to have eyes for the commander, and perhaps some sort of pre-existing relationship with him too, and she was staring at him longingly as he was giving his speech to the men, only for her to find herself completely blanked by him. Something which also caused her to wander into the woods and have a little Belarusian cry session. Once the pair notice each other, they go from crying to laughing laughing, to Glasha beginning to make fun of Floyer by saying that the men left him behind simply because they took pity on him. It might seem that she's just being horrible to him for the sake of being horrible, but it's actually just an old Soviet flirting technique. She then starts to act a little bit nutty and say some weird things, but I'm not sure if that's just a Belarusian thing or not, before suddenly trying to steal his grenade to blow herself up with, before deciding to kiss him instead. Someone get this girl some mood stabilizers. After Floyer's weirdest 30 seconds of his life, he then looks up to see a group of parachuting Germans when suddenly their camp is destroyed as a violent explosion tears through the forest. Once the horrific bombardment has subsided, Floyer finds himself temporarily unable to hear as his ears violently ring out and bleed as he's just experienced his first taste of war. In a daze, the pair look up to see an armed paratrooper wrapped in a tree and quickly make a run for it as he begins spraying them with gunfire because he doesn't want to get any of that children germs on him. Left behind by the main group of partisans and the other ones left behind now being dead, they find themselves completely alone. They're cut off from their allies and forced to hide out in the wilderness and survive in a makeshift shelter as they're drenched by the freezing rain. But Floyer tells Glasha that he's got a plan. He's going to take her back to his mother and sisters before the pair then regroup with their main band of partisans. But the next day before they leave, they allow themselves to bask in their youthful nature as they play around and dance in the rain while keeping that childish sense about them. Eventually, they decide that it's time to return to Floyer's home, but once they make it there, they discover it completely abandoned. Floyer, unable to face the realization, theorizes where they might be, a nearby island surrounded by nothing but bog, perfect for hiding from the Germans due to their phobia of dirty water. They start running from the village in the direction of the island, and Glasha makes the unfortunate mistake of looking behind her as she runs to discover that the entire village has been put up against a wall and executed. She doesn't tell Floyer what she's just seen, instead giving out an agonizing groan as she runs, making Floyer think that she's probably just got asthma or something. They make it to the thick muddy water, and Floyer immediately jumps into it with zero hesitation and begins wading his way through the sludge. The pair nearly drown on several occasions as they struggle to force their way through the heavy substance in a continuous and drawn out shot, really emphasizing the pair's struggle as they battle with their stamina before they eventually make it across. And only when they make it across does Glasha tell him that his entire village is dead, including his mother and his little sisters. She just wanted the benefits of a mud bath first. Floyer doesn't want to believe what Glasha is telling him, so quite understandably attempts to drown her. The most obvious solution to this problem. But after immediately regretting it and pulling her out of the water, the pair are then discovered by a man, a fellow member of the partisans. He retrieves them and takes them further into the woods, where a group of refugees are hiding from the chaos. Among them is a severely burnt but alive man, Floyer's village elder, who tried to warn Floyer against digging for weapons in the battlefield back at the beginning of the movie. A man who was covered in gasoline and lit on fire by laughing German soldiers. Something which convinces Floyer that the atrocities caused by the hands of the Germans are somehow his fault, causing him to do his best impression of an ostrich and try to drown himself in the dirt. But much like ostriches putting their heads into the sand, and Flora being responsible for the demise of everyone he's ever known, it's a myth. The Germans were coming no matter what, and much like they really did during their invasion of Belarus, they insisted on leaving a trail of absolute carnage behind them in an attempt to completely annihilate all of its people. And by this point, any sense of naivety and childish humour has completely left Floyer. Not by his own choice, but like everything around him, it has been brutally killed by the German invaders. He sits there in an emotionally numb state, blankly staring ahead, with the thought of his family and friends being executed whirling around in his head, while around him, members of the partisans are creating a makeshift Hitler out of a skull, mud, and a German uniform. After Floyer's given a haircut by one of the men, they all proceed to take turns in spitting on Hitler, before he's then taken on a mission by the men to retrieve some food. The men and their new Austrian friend that's tagging along. But instead of food, what they actually end up retrieving is German gunfire, as they've discovered the food store. Floyer and the 3 other men make a run for it, and they sprint through an open field as the sound of gunshots whiz past their heads. One of the men refuses to leave behind his little Hitler Barbie doll, despite it very obviously slowing him down while under direct gunfire. Belarusians are just built different, and despite all of them very nearly being filled with bullets, once they make it to the safety of the tree line, they proceed to laugh and joke about what just happened, and the absurdity of the man refusing to drop his arts and crafts Hitler. They hide in a grass along a roadside frequently used by the Germans, and after waiting for a tank to pass, they proceed to place the Hitler body pillow in the middle of the road and arm him with explosives for the next group of Germans to discover. and while attempting to take back what little food they did manage to recover, the group accidentally discover themselves in the middle of a minefield as a mine explodes, instantly killing 2 of them. Men who literally moments ago were laughing and joking with Floyer, and just like that, they're gone in an instant. With it now just being Floyer and the only other surviving man, with the food exploding back there with their buddy's hopes and ambitions, decide to steal a cow from a German collaborator farmer while forcing him to roll around in cow manure. Laughing and joking as they think that they've actually managed to pull it off, they stop for a little calcium break when suddenly they're fired at by a German machine gun. A German machine gun that was genuinely firing slightly over the head of a literal teenage boy. The Soviets didn't believe in health and safety. Floyer and the cow survived, but the other man unfortunately does not, as he's hit in the chest. After stopping the gunfire for a second, allowing Floyer to realise that he's well and truly alone while pinned down by the Germans, suddenly another volley of gunfire comes his way, and the cow is hit as well. In a scene where I'm pretty sure they genuinely shot a cow. Using his milked-up friend as cover, Floyer hides behind him and once again begins to break down in tears, as no matter what he does, everyone and everything around him keeps on dying, and he has no idea how to make it stop. All he's doing is trying his best to save his people, and anytime he thinks that he might be proceeding towards that goal, he's reminded just how evil war truly is. That night, Floyer cries himself to sleep while resting on the cow, and with the Germans not bothering to come and investigate what they were shooting at the previous night, he wakes up to find himself safe. At least for now. Wanting to still try and feed the survivors hiding back in the woods, he attempts to drag the dead cow, but makes absolutely no progress. Do you even lift, bro? That is, until he discovers a horse and carriage not far away from him, which he proceeds to try and steal from a farmer at gunpoint in order to move the animal. The old farmer attempts to stop him, with Floyer even threatening to shoot him with his gun at one point, when suddenly they hear a vehicle approaching, and considering that cows don't usually sound like they have petrol engines in them, it must be the Germans. So quickly thinking on his feet, despite just having a gun pointed at him by this young boy, the farmer has him hide his gun and jacket, and tells him that he's going to take him back to the village, where he'll pretend to be a part of his family. He knew that Floyer didn't actually want to hurt him, and he's seen the effects that war will have on you, and could still find it within his heart to immediately try and save his life with zero hesitation. After making it to the village, Floyer is horrified to discover that it's occupied by hundreds of Nazi forces, as a German parades a dead man through the village with a sign saying, "I insulted a German soldier this morning." The old man takes Floyer back to his extremely large family, with none of them questioning who this boy is in an attempt to keep him safe, when suddenly German soldiers enter the house, and Floyer watches on in disgust as they begin to eat their food, steal their belongings, and break their windows with a complete disregard for these people. After leaving the house, Floyer is thrown to the ground and laughed at by a group of the soldiers, and notices that a group of the locals are being to walk through the village while holding a painting of a funny-looking Austrian man with a small penis that calls him a liberator. Amongst the extreme chaos and confusion, German voices over a loudspeaker tell them that they're allowed to move to a more civilized country with their children, but they need to provide documentation. But what they really want the documentation for is to get a definitive list of everyone currently living in the village. And what they want their children for is something even more sinister. The villagers are forced to run around in circles while being whipped and harassed by drunk German soldiers, where they're eventually then rounded up and forced into a barn while repeatedly being reminded to make sure that they bring their children with them. The elderly, the young, men, women, children and infants are all crammed into the barn until it physically isn't possible to fit another person in. After the doors lock behind them, a man attempts to look out the window to see what's going on, to find himself immediately shot and killed, without realizing that he's probably just been granted the swiftest death out of the bunch. Floyer's actor, Alexei, would tell director Klimov that this barn scene was one of the most frightening scenes in the entire movie to shoot, a movie that's seen him shot at by literal live ammunition and nearly blown up on several occasions, meaning that the horror and despair that you see on the young boy's face here is real, genuine horror. A member of the SS then appears in one of the windows and tells them that anyone who wants to leave is free to go, but they must leave their children behind, and there will be no exceptions. And after seeing what happened to that man who looked through the window earlier, being completely and utterly terrified to move, and not being sure if he's actually telling the truth, nobody moves. That is, until Floyer decides that he's going to climb out of the window. I guess being old enough to not be classed as a child, he climbs out while being directly stared at by hundreds of German soldiers who looks like they'd want nothing more than to be allowed to open fire. Suddenly, a woman throws her child out of the window and attempts to climb out with it. But the child is then thrown straight back through the window, and the woman is then dragged away by her hair by a group of men for the horrific reasons that you're thinking. Floyer, then watching on in horror as there's absolutely nothing he can do, witnesses as many of the German soldiers proceed to laugh and joke as they then throw grenades into the barn currently full of people before deciding to set it ablaze with dozens of Molotov cocktails. They laugh and cheer as they revel in the absolute carnage of everything, as over the roar of the fires and the sound of the soldiers celebrating, men, women and children burning alive can be heard screaming from the barn. And after an excruciatingly long amount of time, hearing their screams of horrors, the Germans then proceed to finish the job once and for all by using flamethrowers, meaning that if they just simply wanted them to be dead, then they always had the ability to do it as fast and as efficiently as possible, yet they all decided to get drunk and have fun, committing some of the worst atrocities that mankind has ever seen. And Klimov said in an interview that the events with the peasants actually happened as shown in the movie. What was important to him, that all of the events depicted in the movie genuinely did happen in Belarus, none of which was dramatised for theatrical effect. If anything, it barely scratches the surface of the true horrors of what really happened there. After all, there were Germans there. After watching hundreds of people be cooked alive, as the pure evil surrounding him laughs at their screams, he's then forced to his knees and has a Luger pointed at his head by a member of the SS. He's being forced to pose for a picture, unaware if the next one is going to contain his corpse. Once they're done with the picture, they throw him to the ground as if he's nothing more than unwanted trash, leaving behind in the burning village as he slumps into the dirt, contemplating if it would have been better or not for the man to have just shot him there. And with the village now fully ablaze, one final German checking for survivors mistakes him for dead, and they leave him there as they march on to the next village to repeat everything all over again. Director Klimov was worried that due to using an untrained actor, Alexei would end up in an insane asylum due to his experiences working on the film, so actually enlisted the help of a professional to perform some autogenic training with the boy, with that ironically being a relaxation technique created by a Nazi. I bet he did not see that coming. Apart from Floyer, simply because he was mistaken for dead, the only living things allowed to leave that village is the livestock that the Germans stole for their own consumption, and a handful of young women who have been torn from their homes to be brutally gang raped. And as far as the Germans are concerned, the only living thing that remains in the village is a bedridden babushka they transported out into the middle of the village to be left to die by the mercy of the elements. And Floyer at this point, nothing more than a broken soul, a little boy with visible grey hairs protruding through his head, is left to aimlessly wander through the woods once again with a blank 1,000-yard stare. But after walking for a while, he ends up coming across the aftermath of a battle between the partisans and the very group of Nazis who just passed through the village. And the partisans won. He discovers a dying female member of the SS who was present at the massacre and leaves her there to slowly die all alone before continuing onwards. He returns to the spot in the field where he hid all of his gear before being discovered by his commander. Floyer notices that walking towards him is the still alive gang woman who was taken from the village. She stumbles towards him with blood running down her legs while carrying a whistle in her mouth. All he can do is stare at her and think about Glasha, because apparently he likes them a little bit mentally unstable. Coming across a fuel canister at the side of the road, and knowing that they've got German survivors, Floyer wants some revenge, and upon arriving discovers a group of soldiers, including the very man who authorized the massacre. But while on this end of the gun, he's nothing more than a coward, a scared old man trying to push the blames on others. The German soldiers then begin frantically pleading for their lives, blaming it on the members of the SS, saying that they were forced to do it, with everyone else in attendance knowing that they're lying through their teeth. They laughed, they joked, they drank, they tortured, and they enjoyed it. A member of the SS is exposed by Floyer as the one who said you can leave, but your kids must stay and burn. The man makes no attempt to even try and deny it. He's so committed to his heinous beliefs that right up until the end, he lets his hatred consume him as he tells him that they're all inferior and have no right to a future that they can stop if no children exist to create it. One of the German soldiers then begins begging for his life, so Floyer hands them the fuel canister as the partisan commander tells them to burn the SS. Without hesitation to save his own skin, he then begins pouring it all over the others with the full intention of burning them all alive, when suddenly someone from the crowd opens fire, causing everyone to unload on them. There will be no survivors today. Floyer, now nothing but a shell of that fun little outgoing boy we met in the beginning, discovers a picture calling Hitler a liberator, so decides to shoot it. The movie then tells us that 628 Belarusian villages were burnt to the ground, while all of the occupants were still inside of it. What we just witnessed had happened 628 times in real life, and it wasn't even that long ago. After repeatedly firing into the portrait, Floyer eventually manages to catch up with his fellow partisans to fight another day. The movie then comes to an end, but its message doesn't. Based on the book Katyn and the memoirs I Am From a Fiery Village, the atrocities committed in this movie also happened in real life. Which is why, when Klimov started to become a little bit worried that perhaps this movie would simply be too much for people to watch, Alice Adamovich, the previous child soldier who wrote the book that this was based on, simply tells him, then let them not watch it. This is something we must leave after us, as evidence of war and as a plea for peace. Come and See is not only a brutal movie to watch, but it was also quite the brutal movie to create, especially for the at the time young Alexei, who would be forced to endure the horrible subject matters depicted. He would later state that it was the most debilitating fatigue and hunger, as he kept the most severe diet, and once the filming was over, he returned to school not only thin, but with grey hair. With the grey hair just being stubborn remnants of the makeup used to dye it, but even so, shooting this movie likely had quite the effect on the boy, as he experienced it all in real time, as it was shot in chronological order for maximum effect. And let's not forget that basically no safety precautions were put in place, because where would the fun be in that? So before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a big shout out and a massive thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who every month continue to go out of their way to help support the channel. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great support, but you also get access to a few little perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can then get links to all uncensored versions of videos. So starting off with this week's new YouTube member signups, a massive thank you to Jablissi, B Moose, Monet, Garango Horror, Jordan Parker, PC Van Der Veen, Danga1999, Hell Nor Heaven, Sungaff, Table Kun, Zachary Peters, The Useless Whale, Karen Suter, The Soldier 420, Mai, the one guy you might like from somewhere, Zarzar Lord, Loki, Zach Bennett, Ace the Spade, Ananana, Thiago Uriarte, U3DPZNRZ, Sean Cicilano, Old Man Brendy, James Warner, Difficulty Spike, CeeLo Graham, Anthony Clarté, Travster100, Catlin Dexter, TXC0, Tyler Wisensky, Boxhead, Tyler Andrews, Feisty Squirrel, and Jas Renee. And now heading over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to Renars Panovs, Mars, Spike ZX, Newly D, Elite Love 21, Tom, Jordan Nagian, Bastion, Dewey Doo, Ellie Belly, Primezilla, Demarcus Morland, John Has, Thomas Harding, Vex124, Christian McLean, Dallas Cleash, Nightcore, Big Will's Father, thanks Dad, Kevin Pham, Kaylee, Jonathan Brogard, 3M Sinatas, Bethany Vaughan, Boyd Van Gwern, Moo, Sheba, Mary, and Ben Woodbridge. So once again, a massive shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.